Hey, you're listening to Blindsight. Let's go. Mental health isn't something to take lightly. It's time to fight. It's time to thrive. Let's do this.
Welcome to Blindsight. This is your host, Bill Lundgren, and this is not the Blindsight, which is the NFL production that I keep, my Alexa keeps mixing up when I tune in to my own program. But anyway, welcome aboard. This is going to be, I think, a very helpful, significant program, but it may be uncomfortable for some people. We'll be talking about suicide and suicide prevention. And, you know, I keep saying to people, take care of yourself, but we think if you stick around and listen, you'll learn a lot. And I'm certainly looking forward to having a chance to talk with our guest, who's Zach Tidwell. He's a former Marine. He is a software developer, and he's also an adaptive athletics. So he's a man with many talents. And Zach, welcome aboard.
Thank you. I'm also really good looking, so I don't.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everyone knows. But no, thank you for that. Thanks for having me on.
Great. Zach, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I am a 29-year-old Marine Corps veteran, which you mentioned, and I am totally blind and deaf in one ear because I shot myself in the head almost 6 years ago. March 31st will be 6 years, but I was struggling with depression and wasn't speaking up about it. And ultimately that caught up with me, and it's been a wild ride, but now we're here.
And we're lucky to have you survive and to do the kind of work that you're doing. What happened? What happened as a Marine? What happened that you ended up 6 years ago in the position that you were in?
Ultimately, looking back on it, it's pretty easy for me to see that it was a combination of a traumatic brain injury, personal circumstances, and really a lack of healthy coping skills. I was a machine gunner in the Marines, and I deployed twice, but I didn't see combat. And on my second deployment, I had married my high school sweetheart before my second deployment, and I found out at the tail end of that deployment that she was having an affair, and
Ouch.
I found out from the other guy's wife. So it was pretty wild. But it was, I came back from that deployment and tried to make things work with her, and it didn't. But so I finally separated from her in January of 2018 and was just keeping myself very, very busy. I've always done better when I'm busy, and I wasn't super happy, as you can probably imagine, but I was dealing with it and by keeping myself very busy. And one of the things that I would do when we weren't out in the field was taking my dirt bike out to the racetrack on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
And in March of 2018, I was in a really nasty motorcycle accident out at the tracks that I used to go ride at. And that resulted in a traumatic brain injury that really, it shifted my whole demeanor, and I didn't even recognize how much of an impact it had on me until I was able to look back and finally started to open up about the stuff after I shot myself. But so that was March of 2018. I really started to struggle specifically with ruminating around everything that had happened with her after that. But I also became very agitative and very impulsive, and I couldn't sleep. And so I discovered that having a couple drinks before bed would help me at least fall asleep, even though I couldn't stay asleep. And 1 or 2 drinks led to 3 or 4, and ultimately developed into a drinking problem. But I was honorably discharged from the Marines in August of 2018 because I'd finished my enlistment. I came home, started going to school, and was just progressively getting worse and still not talking about it because I thought it was weak to speak up. Especially having come from an infantry environment in the Marines, like that is, you shut up and suck it up. And that's necessary in that environment. But I didn't realize that that wouldn't serve me well as a civilian. And so I just kept getting worse. So, even though I was going to school full time and working full time, I was keeping up appearances. That continued all the way through March of 2019, where I had reached the point where I believed that the spot I was in was inescapable. And 4 days before I shot myself, I cleared my gun out and held it to my head. That was the first time that I had ever mishandled a firearm in my life. I'd grown up around guns. Guns is what I did professionally for 4 years. And something I don't know what triggered that night for me to be like, this is the night where I'm going to consider this, because I was sober that night, which was a rarity at that point, because I was drinking most nights. But I decided like I had found my escape. And 3 days after that, my parents were at my apartment with my little sisters. I kept up appearances again that everything was fine. The next day, I decided that I was going to go through with it and was recording a video to my family instead of a note. And that was the first time that I'd ever actually opened up about everything. And in the middle of recording it, my roommate came home early. So I put it on pause, went out into the kitchen and talked to him like nothing was wrong, and then went back in my room and shot myself.
Which is unfortunately not a uncommon story. And what happened after that?
Yeah, it's definitely not uncommon, especially, this gets talked about a lot in the veteran community. When I got out of the Marines, the number that was touted was 22 American veterans a day were committing suicide. And I've heard that the number got as high as 40 a day in recent times, and especially during COVID. So, and that's just Americans, veterans. Like it's wild how prevalent this issue is. But ultimately, I don't know why I keep saying ultimately. I don't think I've ever said that word so much in my life. But I wound up being taken to the hospital and was on life support for some time. When they brought me off of life support, I found out that I was totally blind and deaf in 1 year. And no one really knew at first. No one knew if I was still going to be me. Before that, it was no one knew if I was going to survive. Then it was no one knew if I was going to be me. Then it was they were telling me for a while that I was going to get some sight back in my left eye when I had my face reconstructed, because I shot myself between the eyes. So my sinuses, the bridge of my nose, the lower part of my forehead, and most of my right eye socket were just gone. So one day a doctor was doing rounds in the ICU and just dropped it on us that, hey, you are going to be totally blind. There was no bedside manner or anything or preamble. She just was going down her checklist and dropped it on me. And that later that afternoon, when my parents got to the hospital and we were talking about it, my only experience with blind people up to that point, I had never met one. I had seen one visually impaired person navigating with a white cane when I was in college. And before that, it was seeing the salt and pepper shakers in the Marine Corps Chow Hall in my area of base where I was stationed on Camp Pendleton, in tiny print said "made proudly by the blind and visually impaired" on them. And for whatever reason, when my parents started talking about what the future would look like for me, it was like there was the idea thrown out that I could get a guide dog and maybe you could be a therapist, because I'd been going to school for nursing leading up to me shooting myself. And and my mind went to, I'm not making freaking salt and pepper shakers. And I don't know why, but I blurted that out loud and had to fill my parents in on the story behind it. But that was, I had always, I'd always wanted to do something very impactful, and I had done that and had been a high achiever, and I didn't want to. Now I wasn't going to change that just because I was blind and deaf in 1 year.
Good.
And that kind of lit a fire that I pushed forward with and chased my independence. That was the big thing that I wanted back. And so 8.5 months after I pulled the trigger, I was snowboarding again. A month after that, I was back in college. 6 months after that, I was back on my own. Yeah, and I was just stumbling through things, and that was kind of getting some momentum behind me.
That's a wonderful story, because what you did was take, say, I'm not just going to sit here and do nothing and feel sorry for myself. I hear you saying, okay, I'm going to be back doing the things that I like to do, even though this has changed. And what was that like for you when you started snowboarding again, went back to school, did all these kinds of things? Did you feel better about yourself? Did you see a counselor? Did you, what happened there?
I was kind of forced into seeing a psychologist while I was in the hospital. When you're laying there with a bullet hole in your forehead, they don't really give you an option for that, but it is something that I have stuck with. And there was a lot of work to do because I had avoided dealing with all of these things. And now it was out there, so I had to address it. But for me, that first snowboarding trip was huge because it was a taste of independence again. I had been to blind rehab for 2.5 months prior to that, but I still wasn't independent. I just had the very basics of these skills. And so when I got back out on the slopes and found out if you could get me to a run, I could fall my way down it, but independently, like that was huge for me. And it became that these adaptive sports trips and restoring a sense of normalcy, even though nothing was normal in my life anymore, was
right.
kind of there was like light at the end of the tunnel for me. So like it was always me kind of leapfrogging to the next trip. Like, all right, I gotta do X, Y, and Z until I get back to skiing, or that turned into rock climbing and whitewater kayaking and competing in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But that actually, right at the beginning of 2021, it was the middle of the COVID lockdowns. I'd moved out on my own, as I mentioned. I was up in Denver where I didn't know anyone and everything was shut down because of COVID. And
right.
I think the pace of everything had finally slowed so much that I kind of had to stop and pay the piper a little bit. And everything registered on how different my life was. And I was living on my own again and going to school and doing all these things, but that was really all I could do. I mean, my days were spent doing homework, working out, or listening to audiobooks and podcasts because I didn't know how to do anything, or practicing my cooking. And I would burn half the food that I cooked, or undercook stuff, or make messes all over the place. And then I'm crawling around on my hands and knees trying to find stuff that I dropped. And I just realizing how different everything was finally registered. And I still think this was the lowest point that I've ever reached, even more so than when I shot myself. But
sure,
it was different because I spoke up this time. And
that's right.
Yeah. So this is early 2021, and I was terrified to speak up because I thought that I was going to be institutionalized and locked away somewhere. But I had weekly calls with my therapist still at this point. And one day I told her, I was like, hey, I do not want to be here. I don't understand why. By all measures, everything in my life is going incredibly well right now. I've adapted incredibly well to my disabilities, and I'm doing all of these things, but I do not want to be here. And I know where this leads. I need help. And she was just there for me. And we started talking, or transitioned from talking once a week to once a day, and then sometimes multiple times a day because it was that bad. And that lasted several months. But in that, it was the first time, that was the first time that I ever actually handled something in the moment. And I dug myself out of that rut over the next couple months. And that was a huge lesson to me that things could and would get better so long as I showed up and did the work. And
you got it.
That's something people don't realize. And I didn't realize before I shot myself. Obviously, if I knew or understood that was this inescapable place, or seemingly inescapable place, was escapable, I probably would have spoken up. And that's why I try and talk about this stuff now, because it can save so many lives. And it's not to say that digging yourself out of those holes is easy or comfortable, or that it's going to come quick, but it is possible. And you owe it to yourself to do that work and to those around you. And I think people need to hear that it can get better, right? It's not work for naught. And so that was, by the time that the summer semester had rolled around in 2021, I was out of that rut. But I actually experienced my first math class as a blind man, and nothing about the class was accessible, and the school wasn't making anything accessible because it was over a summer semester.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the staff they were short staffed. And so they were like, hey, this is kind of what we have. And that bothered me because I was fully independent. And if you sat my math homework in front of me, I couldn't do it because the software was inaccessible.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the school assigned someone to be my eyeballs, and I refused to take that for an answer. And I wound up researching what caused this. Like, how come I could pay my mortgage by myself, but I couldn't do my math homework? Or how come I could write these, 10-page long research papers, but not do my math homework? Or how come Uber worked, but not Lyft, or whatever? And I found out that it all came down to the code of each app or website that I was accessing. Developers who write the front end code, which is all the interface stuff that we interact with or sighted people can see,
right,
can take deliberate steps to make those things accessible. Prior to that, I just knew that my screen reader worked with some things and not with others. But when I found that out, I said, screw it, and decided to become part of the solution, because I really, you can sit and whine all you want, but if you're not part of the solution, you're not helping anything. You're just being another whiner. So I dropped out of college and started teaching myself how to code so that I could make things that are accessible to everyone. So now, I guess at that same time, I hadn't realized that I was an alcoholic leading up to my suicide attempt, which sounds so crazy to say now, looking back, but hindsight is 2020. So actually, after I took my first exam for that math class, and as I was in the middle of kind of researching all of this accessibility stuff and how screen readers actually worked, I decided I had the bright idea that I was going to blow off some steam after the first exam. So I ordered some alcohol that night, and that kicked off 2.5 years of rampant alcoholism, because it just unlocked whatever was inside me from before. And that's a very common thing or a common piece of knowledge in recovery communities, that hey, your addiction, even if you've tamed it for a time, if you go back to it,
you go back to it, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and pick up kind of where you left off, or where you had left it before, and that certainly held true for me. But so I progressively, I started drinking away my ability to deal with stress, because when things would get frustrating, and specifically for whatever reason, digital accessibility, as you can imagine, probably from what I just said, I decided to drop out of college to teach myself how to code, because it bothered me. It is a hot button for me. So that became a huge source for whatever reason of excuses that I would use to let myself drink. And as you can imagine, trying to teach yourself how to code and find resources that are accessible, and then on top of that, learn, because I have to write code inside of other pieces of software, which are usually not 100% accessible either. I had all sorts of excuses to use, and I continued along that path, and was, anytime that I was coherent enough to code, I was treating that like a full-time job. And while still getting worse and worse, and I wound up going to rehab in 2022, because I had realized, okay, this is something that I can't stop on my own.
You signed yourself into an alcohol, drug abuse rehab. Yep. Okay.
Yep. So there was, there was a progression to that. I had tried AA. That didn't work because I didn't have the discipline for it. And I tried an outpatient rehab program. That didn't work because I was a drunk. And then, that was the natural next step in the progression. But while I was there, I got diagnosed with it's an incurable degenerative neurological disease that I can't do anything about. They can't do anything to treat, and will eventually degrade my brain tissue to the point that I will be in a vegetative state until I ultimately succumb to something else like pneumonia. And I found that out while I was there. So that just added fuel to the fire when I came home from rehab. So I continued getting worse and worse. And ultimately at the very worst of my drinking, I was binging for 2 or 3 days straight, recovering for 2 or 3 days because I was that hungover, and then doing it all over again. I mean, it was pitiful. But I kept plugging away on coding, and my first app came out on the 4th of July in 2023. And that is when I started making progress. It was called Xanagrams. I just recently took it off of the App Store because of the next project that I'm working on, the book that I've been writing and have now finished writing, but am waiting for feedback on before I do another draft and try and get it published. And then my own podcast that I've got going on. I've been too busy, so took it off the App Store, but it was a word puzzle game that looked and functioned normally for people without disabilities, but was accessible for the entire range of visual impairments. Even completely blind and completely deaf users could use them with refreshable braille displays. People with no arms or spinal cord injuries could use it with their voice. And I started getting these emails from people that were like, just, sending messages like, oh, this has been so impactful, and it's been nice to play games with my wife or whoever. Yep. Mm-hmm. And so I finally had a sense of purpose again and a sense of identity, because I had lost that when I shot myself. Yeah. Because I wasn't. Go for it.
See, if I can just put in here what I'm hearing is someone who has an enormous fight, ability to survive, and it gets waylaid periodically, but one thing after another you have kept on. And I think that's very vital for all of us, people with disabilities, people with alcoholism, people who we're talking about suicide and suicide prevention. You have a guy who is a fighter, and that is a remarkable skill. Then what happens a lot of times, we give up. And you didn't give up. And that's the message I think that is real important to get out to people. And I'm really awed in many ways to hear your story.
Thank you. And that's why I try and talk about this stuff, because all these, I seem to have had an extra helping of some of these barriers, and especially, the alcoholism part of it, that's all on me. The suicide is all on me. Like, I am ultimately, the only thing here that was not a result of my own actions was the Huntington's disease, which, that's bad luck. But, we have agency in these things too. And both in whether you were born blind or born with a different disability, you still have a choice to learn how to deal with it and how to adapt. Like that is a choice that we have. That's
an important message to get out to people. And, what we're talking about is saying not, when something happens like blindness or whatever, you don't give up. And the question is, finding the help. Now, you mentioned going to a counselor help. Did you continue that through this process of recovery for you? After the drinking stopped, you went into rehab, and that changed everything. Has the counseling added on to that to help?
Yeah, that was a tough one, because it was, really with alcoholism, the only one who can really help you is yourself.
Yeah.
Like that is right. Again, it comes down to your decision. So she would, we would talk, because after I got out of that pit in 2021, we went back to talking once a week. And a lot of these check-ins were, well, hey, I drank again this week.
Yeah.
Or, hey, sorry, I missed our appointment last week. I was drunk.
Right.
But, like, that's not a fun thing to admit, but it was another,
but the truth was out. The truth was out. Yeah. And you were talking. This is really crucial. Rather than keeping it inside of you, you were talking, even though you were continuing behavior that you look back on and shouldn't have happened. But the fact is, you were talking about it rather than hiding it.
Well, and I was at that point, the thing I was really struggling with, my new excuse was that the Huntington's disease. And I freaking struggled with that because that sucks. But there were a couple of key interactions, not just from my therapist, because so basically my final drink, like I started making progress after that app came out. My final drink ended up being on December 5th of 2023.
Okay.
And in that timeline between the 4th of July, when I finally started making progress and like the few stumblings that I had, it was having to admit that I'd messed up every week when I talked to my counselor was one thing, but also, I would get drunk and call people and like those who cared about me. Someone who's very close with me. Actually, it was the person who was assigned to be my eyeballs for that math class. I've gotten very close with her and her husband over the past couple of years, but I had called them drunk one day and they were trying to be there for me, but they had to have the talk with me. We're like, hey, if we're not going to enable you, if that happens again, like that will be the end of our friendship with you. And there was that, but so, people, you have to set boundaries with people though. Like that was the right thing for them to do.
Yep.
That absolutely was the right thing for them to do. And it was that, but in that conversation, they'd also said, if you don't stop, you are going to die from this. And then when I got diagnosed with Huntington's disease, basically the conversation was, this is not curable. This is not really treatable. They have medications because it starts as your brain tissue starts to die. It starts as like a movement disorder and then becomes speech and behavioral and slow as it progresses. But they have some medications that can treat the movements that happen in the beginning, and that's about it. Other than that, they said all you can really do to help yourself is eat right, exercise, take care of yourself. And I've always exercised a lot and eaten very clean.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
My only thing there was the drinking. And I also realized, I'm living on a shorter timeline than a lot of people will have. And I was blacking out for 2 or 3 day stints of the time that I do have. And that for me was, the decision point was, I'm not going to continue drinking away the time that I have. And that's just because I have Huntington's disease doesn't mean that same thought process should apply to anyone that's struggling with substance abuse, because we all have limited time here. And ultimately that is what it came down to for me, was something clicked, and it was the kind of that progression of things for me. And it's here we are, it's March of 2025 and I haven't had a drink. And as shockingly, things have gotten better all around in my life since I have stopped drinking.
Things haven't gotten better. You've made them better. Yeah,
I've learned the coping skills.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, there are, there's strategies that, because I essentially had drank away my ability to cope with stress, because anytime that something would rub me the wrong way, I would lean to the booze because I had another excuse. And so I've kind of had to relearn all these things and just be intentional with it. But these are skills that we can learn and apply to other areas of life too. It doesn't just have to be, hey, I'm having a crappy month or whatever it is.
Amen. Yeah. You're quite a role model. You may be uncomfortable with the idea of role model, but you are, in terms of your ability to say, okay, enough is enough. I want to use my life, however long I have, to my best ability. And you've talked about finishing a book. You're talking about a lot of things for which you have the skills, obviously, and you are using that to motivate you to move forward. And I think that's an important lesson to all of us. We have to look at where we are and say, wait a minute, is this the way we want to live? Or is there something better? And that's exactly what you are presenting. Yeah, we can make our lives differently. And we can do the things that we want to do. We just have to make some important decisions, like not drinking, like taking care of yourself in the way. What kind of sports are you doing right now?
Yeah, and to add to what you said there, like part of that is taking ownership of this stuff.
Right.
And everyone has their stuff that they're dealing with. And like you said, if we're adapting to blindness in making some of these decisions. A lot of that is accepting, hey, if you weren't born visually impaired, a lot of the stuff you can get back into, it's just going to be different. You have to accept and be okay with that.
Absolutely. You can do whatever you want to do. You have to do it differently.
Yeah. And be okay with that and be happy with that and be thankful that you still have that. But today, so like my pretty typical routine, I lift weights 6 days a week and I train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 5 days a week. So like I lifted this morning and then went to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu right after. But this weekend I'm leaving for a ski trip up in Steamboat. That's probably my favorite thing to do still is skiing. Mm-hmm. I whitewater kayak, I rock climb, I surf, I've skydived. I will pretty much take an opportunity to do whatever I can. But like my big ones are, and jujitsu and weightlifting, neither of those are adaptive things. Right. Mm-hmm. I compete against people without disabilities, but it's, again, you find other ways to do it. And a lot of that sometimes is swallowing your pride and being willing to ask for help. Like I had to track down and kind of pester some jujitsu gyms to be willing to work with me in the beginning, but it's been incredible since. Right. But the skiing, the rock climbing, the kayaking are kind of my big ones. The other stuff is just kind of onesies and twosies that I've had opportunities to do.
Oh, that's terrific. I think and I want to get back to the thing that you said, if you can't do it yourself, you find someone to help you to do what you want to do, which is not demeaning. A lot of people see this as demeaning. Oh, I've got to have help. No. It's, as you say, doing things differently and being comfortable with that. And that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing you really put in tremendous amount of work to take care of yourself and letting people know when you need something. And I know that a lot of men, not just military men, but men, period, have real difficulty, males, but women as well, but males particularly are trained never to ask for help.
Yeah, I think we're definitely worse than females on that, for sure.
Yes, exactly.
That's been something I've traditionally in the past been really bad about, and I'll still, I have to force myself sometimes, but I have learned, and I've thought about this a lot, our world, especially the physical world, is not ever going to be more accessible to us than it is now. Right? We've got Braille signs and stuff like that at places. Like the digital world could be more accessible for sure, and I'm doing my part to make that happen. But
absolutely,
the physical world, there's not going to be a whole lot of changes for us. What is possible, though, despite that, is for you to adapt your environment to you. And a lot of that does come from connecting with people who are willing to help. And it's, in the beginning, you're probably going to need a lot more help than you do, but again, it's accepting that is the different way that you're going to have to do things, and then working to be as independent as you can in those areas that you can't still, like we're never, at least in the foreseeable future, we're not going to be driving anytime soon.
Right.
Yeah. It's just, again, it's shifting your mindset and how you are going to choose to view things. Again, I use the word choose a lot because these are all choices that we have. And I think it maybe gets oversimplified because we've just talked about 6 years, in the course of 30 minutes, but this hasn't been smooth the whole time, but these have all been actions and that I have taken and are possible for others to take. And you're not always going to get the answers that you want from people when you do ask for help, but most people out there, especially if they see you going out to do something crazy that no one thinks a blind person can do, are going to be all for helping you do that.
Yep. You got it. And we have to trust other people to give us a hand. We have to be picky about who it is, because some people like to take over, but they say, okay, to work with me, help me to continue to be independent in what I'm doing. And you have to kind of set boundaries with other people and on yourself to do what it is you want to do when you have a clearer vision, which you obviously have, That's the step forward. Was the Veterans Administration helpful to you at all?
Yes. So when I mentioned that I went to Blind Rehab for 2.5 months, that was with the VA.
Okay.
And they have 13 of these blind rehab facilities around the country where I basically went to school for 7 hours a day on the weekdays that I was there for the 2.5 months that I was there. And so I got all my basic skills from them. And
I see. Okay.
yeah. And, they really, veterans benefits are incredible. I think a lot of people know that, but specifically for blind rehab, like they're huge. Like adaptive tech for me, they will, as long as it is justified in facilitating my independence and it's not something that I'm just asking for that I don't really need, like they will pay for it and get it for me. So if there's any blind vets out here listening that aren't aware of that, Google VA Blind Rehab Services, and they're huge.
I was hoping you would say that. Yeah. The other thing for people who are thinking about suicide, who are fearful that what I'm hearing, the message that is coming across, we have to talk about it. We have to stop the silence. And for vets who are looking for help, well, everybody can dial 988 for the mental health hotline. But after you dial and you press 1, that gets you directly into the VA system. And so that you can get the kind of help that Zach is talking about. And I think that's an important resource for people to know. How do people get a hold of you? I think you have a podcast, you have some other things.
I do. I want to add to what you just said real quick.
Okay.
One more thing. I've called the crisis line before. One time they got me the help that I needed. It's, again, you're not going to be imprisoned because you're struggling. These are people who are there who want to help you, and they will get you connected with the services that can help you get better, and that are there to help you to begin to learn these skills, to dig yourself out of this hole and start to handle these other things in life. So do not be afraid to use that resource.
Great.
But in terms of finding me, I'm kind of all over the place. I've got
it sounds like it.
My website is at zachtidwell.net, and that's where big updates will be about the book. That's also where I can be contacted to be booked for speaking engagements. But there's a mailing list on there that I have that is just for the book, and might eventually shift towards the podcast. But that's just if people want to be kept up to date with developments with my book. It's a great place to do it. It's not a spam. You're not going to get spam messages from me.
Good.
That's at zachtidwell.net. My podcast is called Going In Blind with Zach Tidwell, and that is available everywhere. So search for it and you'll find it wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And then I am working on another huge software development project that will hopefully address some of the issues that I had while I was in college and not only make education more accessible to people with disabilities, but also allow us to leverage some cutting edge technologies along with it. And so to be kept up to date with all that stuff, probably need to go to my website and join the mailing list and find me on social media too.
This has been a wonderful, wonderful meeting between you and I. I am really feeling so great about what you're doing and what you're going to be doing, because it isn't just, okay, we've done this, now that's it. You keep moving forward, and I think you're an inspiration to all of us in the blindness community. I appreciate having you on board. I hope we'll be able to keep in touch as you progress, particularly when you have when you're comfortable with your book, we can talk about that. But anyway, I want to remind people, 988, then press 1, and we'll get you the VA. 988 is the regular hotline. And Zach, thank you so much for being on today. And congratulations. And I hope that at times you acknowledge to yourself the power that you've given yourself to make things better.
Thank you. And thanks for being willing to talk about this stuff. I know these are uncomfortable conversations that are still, unfortunately, somewhat taboo, even though they shouldn't be. So these are important conversations to be having.
Yep.
Thank you.
Now, is there any closing thought you want for the people that are listening in right now?
I have kind of already said it, but I always take the opportunity to beat the dead horse on this one. You have to speak up. You are the only person who can help yourself. There are people out there who are willing to help you do that, but ultimately you are in control of that. You have to speak up, and it can and will get better. It's not going to be fast, and it's not going to be comfortable, and it's not going to be easy. But growth will come out of it. You will come out on the other side a more resilient and a stronger person and a better person for having been through it. And again, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
There's a difference between a therapist who's not been there and you in the power that you are able to put in what you just said. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you all for listening in. This is Bill Lundgren of Blindsight. Remember, if you have any feedback you want to give out, there are two ways you can do that. Feedback line, telephone line is 720-712-8856. The feedback for email to feedback at aftersight.org. And Zach will be doing a program with Blind Chick. Well, he'll be able to tell you more from that perspective. I hope you'll tune in to that. Thank you very much. This is Bill Lundgren signing off. Have a great week.